The Pillars of Eternity series are two CRPGs developed by Obsidian Entertainment in the mid to late 2010s. By and large, they were well received, considered good games, or even by some, great games. But to me, that's not good enough, because I think these games deserve to be recognized as contenders for the greatest in the genre. This is a case I'll have to make over many videos, but in this one, I want to focus on the underrated narrative design in the whole series, but particularly in Pillars of Eternity 1. Let's get to it. With Pillars of Eternity, it's clear both from the games and from their fundraising efforts that Obsidian aimed with them to return to an older style of RPG, which is the Infinity Engine era of games, which actually the veteran designers at Obsidian launched their careers with. The three big titles that define this era are, of course, Baldur's Gate, Icewind Dale, and Planescape Torment. As someone who played most of these games, played them a lot, and played them when they were new, here are the features I think capture the feeling for each. So, first, Baldur's Gate. Baldur's Gate really defined the CRPG genre, so anything in that genre is going to be drawing a lot from Baldur's Gate. But to really capture what made it unique from the other Infinity Engine era of games, in my opinion, you have to make an epic divine plot following a single special protagonist. And this isn't as crucial, but many people have remarked that part of what makes this series so great is how it begins so mundane, literally killing rats for pocket change in your childhood home, but ends in a grand ascension to godhood. And it's that epic divine scope of the story which really sets Baldur's Gate apart from the other titles in the Infinity Engine era. The second is Icewind Dale. And to really capture what made Icewind Dale unique, I think you need large-scale difficult encounters that you face with a fully customizable party. Then finally, third is Planescape Torment, the least tactical of the three games in this era, but definitely the one most known for its writing. I actually played it not very much and significantly after its release, but I think what I'm going to say about what makes this game unique is what everyone more experienced with it will say, which is its appeal is philosophical writing centered around themes of memory and identity. In this video, I want to talk about how Pillars of Eternity recaptures that third one, which is the legacy of deep philosophical writing inherited from Planescape Torment. The first decision Obsidian must have faced when planning the overarching strategy of Pillars of Eternity's narrative design was what exact theme or themes it would explore. If it wants to be an inheritor of Planescape Torment, it needs themes, and it needs those themes to be philosophical, but that still leaves a lot of options. Their strategy for choosing is, in my opinion, an unacknowledged stroke of genius. I personally love it. As we noted, Pillars of Eternity is the successor of the Infinity Engine games, and in a delightfully literal move, Obsidian placed Pillars of Eternity in a setting that is literally a successor in time. That is, in an early Renaissance setting, a century or two ahead of the classical medieval setting of the Forgotten Realms. And both of their systems and their narrative design would reflect this choice. Narratively, it's natural to select themes which are pertinent to the Renaissance setting. So what themes would fit best? Well, I would have told them two themes which I think encapsulate the spirit of the Renaissance. First, the conflict of reason and science against the old order of faith and tradition, which is sometimes shortened by historians and just referred to as the Enlightenment. The second theme is the theme of imperialism and subsequent colonialism. Obsidian obviously had the same idea that I had, since these two themes, the Enlightenment and colonialism, absolutely dominate the writing of the series. But of the two, it's the first, reason versus faith, that takes center stage in my opinion, with colonization themes being cast in a significant but still supporting role. No doubt the Enlightenment theme better fit as a successor to Planescape, since it's the more philosophical theme of the two. I see colonialism as more a question of history than philosophy. I think it also fit as a successor to Baldur's Gate, as it better allows for an epic divine plot. Okay, So for their guide to the revolution of reason over faith, they chose the philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche, particularly his writing on the death of God and eternal reoccurrence. While not entirely unsuited, Nietzsche is an unexpected choice. For one, he's not a Renaissance writer. He's typically seen by historians as a herald of philosophical movements after his time, rather than a summation of what came before him. Writers like Descartes, Voltaire, Kant are more likely candidates for exemplars of the Enlightenment. However, I think we can chalk this decision up to Nietzsche just being more fertile artistic soil. There's more drama in Nietzsche's ideas than Descartes, Voltaire, or Kant. I mean, personally, I'm happy they base the series around the death of God instead of, say, the categorical imperative or transcendental idealism. I, of course, realize the irony in calling Nietzsche, a half-mad scribbler of aphorisms, more dramatic than Voltaire, an actual dramatist prodigy. But in true Nietzschean fashion, I will simply own the irony and assert it as true without mawkish appeal to arguments or evidence. I realize, of course, that most listeners won't have enough of a familiarity with things like the Enlightenment or Nietzsche's philosophy on the death of God to be able to recognize these themes if we just booted up Pillars of Eternity and dove right into the narrative design. So I'm going to give a quick crash course on these ideas, starting with the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment refers both to an era in the history of Western Europe and an intellectual movement which defined it. The best summation of the Enlightenment is actually given by Kant, who was a philosopher in it. So, in Kant's words, the Enlightenment is, quote, man's emergence from his self-imposed immaturity. Immaturity being the inability to use one's own understanding without another's guidance. This immaturity is self-imposed if its cause lies not in lack of understanding, but in indecision and lack of courage to use one's own mind without another's guidance. Dare to know. Have the courage to use your own understanding is therefore the motto of the Enlightenment. So, it was a revolution in thought, but not one that came primarily from a change in understanding, but as Kant says, from a change in attitude. It was a renewed confidence in the rational powers of mankind, which led to a rethinking of the old era, defined by the scholastic marriage of Aristotelian philosophy with mostly Christian faith. Naturally, contemporary critics of the Enlightenment see the change of attitude not as a mature confidence, but a decidedly immature arrogance. Regardless of where you land on that, in large dry tomes, sweeping projects were laid out that attempted to construct complex systems of ethics and metaphysics with this new courageous epistemology. Now, the earliest projects, exemplified for me by Descartes, Spinoza, and Leibniz, while drastically different in their ideological machinery, they still resembled the old order in function, which is to say they still defended the existence of God and could with string be accepted by their respective religious authorities. By the time you get to Kant, God is beaten and bruised, spitting blood between shallow breaths in an alley, but not yet a corpse. With human Voltaire, requiescat in pace. Something like this was the picture Nietzsche came to believe, in which he summed up with the poetic proclamation, God is dead. Again, this is another thing that's best explained in his own words, so here it is from The Gay Science. The Gay Science is a book Nietzsche wrote. Sadly, it is not a actual science, although we all would have signed up for Gay Science 101 if it was offered, right? Okay, here it is. I'm going to give it a dramatic reading, so buckle in. Have you not heard of that madman who lit a lantern in the bright morning hours, ran to the marketplace, and cried incessantly, I seek God, I seek God? As many of those who did not believe in God were standing around just then, he provoked much laughter. Has he got lost? Asked one. Did he lose his way like a child? Asked another. Or is he hiding? Is he afraid of us? Has he gone on a voyage? Immigrated? Thus they yelled and laughed. The madman jumped into their midst and pierced them with his eyes. Whither is God? He cried. I will tell you. We have killed him, you and I. All of us are his murderers. But how did we do this? How could we drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? What were we doing when we unchained the earth from its sun? Whither is it moving now? Whither are we moving? Away from all suns? Are we not plunging continually? Backward, sideward, forward, in all directions? Is there still any up or down? Are we not straying as through an infinite nothing? God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderer of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood off us? What water is there for us to clean ourselves? What festivals of atonement? What sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of it? There has never been a greater deed, and whoever is born after us, for the sake of this deed he will belong to a higher history than all history hitherto. Okay, that was long. I love Nietzsche's writing, though. Anyways, the idea here is that, of course, God can no longer be rationally accepted. But Nietzsche's more focused on what that means for us. Unlike the atheists of his time, who he ridiculed for their shallowness, Nietzsche sees this as completely disrupting and disorienting humanity. There's no fixed point anymore, no up or down, no direction at all, just infinite nothing everywhere. In modern internet speak, we could say Nietzsche's black-pilled about atheism. However, being a doomer nihilist about it really offends Nietzsche's cultivated sense of pride. To him, it's pathetic and revolting. So his life work was walking the tightrope between accepting that atheism is a black pill and simultaneously finding joy, fulfillment, and purpose in this bleak nothing. How does he do this? Well, he hints at the answer in the section I read above. Basically, mankind must become gods. Again, this is poetic. The paradigm of divine action is creation ex nihilo, or creation from nothing. In Nietzsche's view, the post-Enlightenment world is infinite nothing. So when he says man must become a god, he means that man must create purpose nevertheless from this nothing through a sheer invincible act of will. The final form of this act of will is affirming the eternal reoccurrence. Everything that is now or ever has been will be again and again an infinite amount of times. If you can face this possibility and say, good, hell yes, let's go for another, then you've ascended, basically. Any other response is weak. And that's Nietzsche, or at least a short enough summary of him that we can then dive into Pillars of Eternity. As an aside, while I find Nietzsche's philosophy super badass and inspiring, Nietzsche's broad project, to me, is kind of silly and unserious in the end. It's like wanting a PlayStation for Christmas and getting coal, then saying, in an irrational, psychotic break, this coal is even better than the PlayStation I wanted. Then you just burn the coal for a few fleeting moments of warmth till it's consumed and you are left again in a cold, desolate world, muttering madly to yourself, this is warmth, there is no warmth. Okay, but enough of my ideas. Now let's boot up Pillars of Eternity and see how the writers reference these themes in their game. Spoilers incoming. I'm not even going to try to avoid spoilers. It would completely ruin what this video is trying to do. So if you really care about spoilers, please do not listen any further. You have been warned. So, in the Pillars of Eternity pantheon, there is a god who is very obviously meant to represent Christianity. It's Aethys, the god of redemption and rebirth. Aethys steals Jesus' signature incarnation move and appears to the world in the form of a kith. Kith, by the way, is the Pillars of Eternity world's name for mankind. It's not mankind because it needs to include all non-human but intelligent creatures you can play, like elves, dwarves, or Orlan. You get the idea. So that's Kith. I'm going to be using the word Kith often. So Aethys appears in the world as a Kith named Saint Widwin. As Widwin, he leads a crusade, a military revolution meant to... Well, no one really knows what it was meant to do, because he died before he could do it. As Adair says,
we blew him up.
The we is the Deerwood, the nation Widwin invaded in his crusade, and where Pillars of Eternity 1 picks up, only 15 years into the aftermath of this momentous event where Aethys is killed. God is dead. Literally, we killed him with a big-ass bomb we made with science. And like Nietzsche's vision of the world, the Deerwood is a bleak, desolate place as a result. I mean, look at this tree. This is the first thing you see when entering Gilded Vale. Welcome to the Age of Reason. All of these points I've outlined are introduced in your first interactions with Gilded Vale, particularly with these two companions and this dungeon, which is the burnt ruins of the Church of Aethys. No one in Gilded Vale is happy or hopeful on account of their religion dying, bad harvests, and a curse which prevents everyone from having healthy children. Almost every child born after the bomb went off is born a vegetable, a malady they call Widwin's legacy. The name Gilded Vale for the town is now bitter irony. Adair, one of the first companions you meet, who is expertly voiced by pre-Critical Role Matt Mercer, is your introduction to these themes. He is a resident of Gilded Vale, former worshipper of Aethys, and a veteran of the Saints' War, which is the war against Saint Widwin. Adair signed up with his pious brother, Woden, to fight against Saint Widwin. Neither of them thought he was actually Aethys incarnate. I mean, why would the god of redemption invade a nation unprovoked? It can't be him, right? So as far as they were concerned, they were fighting against a charlatan and his apostate cult. He and his brother were separated. Adair survived, but Woden didn't. Now it's 15 years later. No one has heard a peep from Aethys since, and it's starting to seem like Widwin really was Aethys, and Adair helped kill his own god. On top of all that, his neighbors in Gilded Vale resent him for not renouncing Aethys. As a general rule, Aethys loyalists are all hung in the Deerwood, thus this tree. The only thing keeping Adair from the same fate are the other veterans in the town who can vouch for the fact that he fought on the right side. The problem is, a lot of those vets aren't sticking around, and there are credible rumors circulating that his brother actually defected and died fighting for Widwin, not against him. By the time you meet him, Adair is looking to get the hell out of Dodge. He's down to help you with your mess, so long as eventually you get around to helping him find out the truth about his brother. Something you are particularly qualified for because you can speak to the dead. That's a subject for another video. Adair copes with it all with his welcome sense of humor, but he is truly troubled by the rumors about his brother. Growing up, he was a troublemaker, and his brother Woden was the one who always knew what was right. Adair was only sure about fighting Widwin because his brother was sure, and if he defected, the only person who could sell it for him was the one he lost. In Adair's quest, you find out the rumors about his brother are in fact true. As a prisoner of war, Woden was confronted by Widwin himself. Widwin spoke to him, told him something about why he was doing this. And Woden defected, as sure of Widwin's divinity as he was sure of the opposite before. But what did Widwin tell him? You never really find out exactly, at least not until the next game. All Adair is left with is the fact that Widwin was definitely Aethys, that he had some kind of mysterious plan that he thought justified all the suffering and violence he caused, and that his beloved brother who he trusted had faith in him till the end. Adair represents a crisis of faith that comes with the death of God. Do you hold on to that trust in God, or instead put your hope in humanity and yourself? Or perhaps abandon hope altogether? All along your journey with Adair, you have opportunities to weigh in on the crisis. You can nudge him towards trust or cynicism. If you choose trust, he goes on to faithfully lead the persecuted underground Church of Aethys in the Deerwood. If you choose skepticism, he will lead the town of Deerford into a new age of secular prosperity and peace as their mayor. So, which will you choose? This is the kind of narrative design that we need more of in the CRPG genre. Through this game about killing monsters and looting dungeons, Obsidian gives us an opportunity to think through and put our mark on one of the great questions of our culture. If you're one of the many who were raised in a devoutly religious family, the death of God is also a personal question that you probably faced or will face. And Adair is an opportunity to retrace those steps, or perhaps explore what things might look like if you chose differently. And Adair is just one example of the kind of decisions you can make in this game. The entire series is peppered with interesting opportunities to weigh in on the death of God. I can't go over all of them, of course, but I do want to touch on a few more. Durance is another one of the companions you get early in Act 1, and he is my favorite companion in the series and probably of any game ever. He's a kind of mendicant priest of Magrin, who is the goddess of fire, trials, purification, innovation, and war, and also the closest to the establishment church in the Deerwood. During the Saints' War, she intervened by helping teach the Deerwooden army how to create the Godhammer bomb that would kill Aethys. Of the 12 priests she chose to make the bomb, Durance is the only survivor. Unlike Adair, Durance does not doubt his faith at all. He is zealously devoted to Magrin and her teachings. He is still facing a crisis of faith, though. Durance's crisis is like Jesus' supposed cry on the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me? Durance has been forsaken by Magrin. For some reason, she's ignoring him, and it's driving him mad. Again, in contrast to Adair, Durance's faith has a ready answer for Magrin's cold shoulder. She is, after all, the goddess of trials and purification. So his answer is to faithfully endure her scorn and be purified at the end. However, through this quest, you will find out that everything Durance was taught and believes is a lie. Magrin isn't ignoring him to purify him. Durance is just an insignificant gnat to her, and he always was. She used him to make the Godhammer, and it was supposed to kill him like it did his comrades. Durance survived the blast, but with a severely disfigured and damaged soul. So Magrin ignores him because she just doesn't recognize him anymore, and she expected him to die anyways. Durance's post-game outcomes will depend on if you convince him of the truth about Magrin or not. If you fail to convince him, he will go on pathetically believing he is enduring a trial until he cracks and commit suicide. However, if you do convince him of the truth, he will dedicate the remainder of his life to getting revenge on the god who slighted him. Now, how could a mere mortal possibly threaten a god? Durance is a man of sheer fucking will. He is one of 2 living beings, including divine beings, to ever kill a god. He's done it before, he can do it again. I just absolutely love this writing. The whole plot is superbly Nietzschean. Your 2 choices are for him to pathetically die, devoted to a false slave morality of purification through the trials of his mistress, or to do the most will-to-power move ever and become a John Wick of the gods. It's just brilliant. It's making me want to do another playthrough just remembering it. That's mostly all I want to say about the companions. I will touch on a third one, Aloth, later. But for the remainder of this video, I will be discussing the Nietzschean themes in the main plot of the series. However, since controversy is so good for the algorithm, I do want to end this section by noting how underappreciated the companions are in Pillars of Eternity 1. The companions in this game weren't hated, although I did see them panned by a critic or two. Mostly they just didn't make an impact in the community at all. I strongly suspect that the reason such fantastic writing went unnoticed is because none of the companions offered in Pillars, not a single one, was bangable. Don't get me wrong, romanceable companions are neat. Good writing doesn't stop being good just because there's romance in the plot. That's ridiculous. However, Writers in our genre need to be able to say things with companions that aren't just about romance, or without romance being shoehorned in, and I'm worried we're on track for that to not be the case in CRPGs. Okay, moving on now. With the Godhammer Endurance's plot, we touched on the theme of science and emerging technology. This is important because the Enlightenment wasn't just pessimism about faith. It was much more optimism about science. In Pillars of Eternity, the analog to science is Animancy, which is of course Greek for magic of the soul. See, the world of Eora is a metaphysically substance dualist world, which is philosophy jargon for saying that every living thing in this universe is a mix of body and of soul, where souls are distinct ectoplasmic substances which you can manipulate with magic. The study of this craft is Animancy. In the traditional religious order, the soul is the realm of the gods, and Animancy is thus forbidden, at worst, or at best suspiciously tolerated, under extensive threat of censure. But this is a new age, where Animancy is funded and studied openly, and without too much supervision, which is good, right? Well, kinda. It's hard to say. It's a new field. It has promise, but much of the research that happens is just utter tripe. It, of course, mirrors the Enlightenment practice of science in the real world, where, for every Isaac Newton, there are 1,000 bungling pricks eager to bleed another patient or measure skull sizes to prove their race is superior. In Pillars of Eternity 1, Animancers are busy trying to cure Widewind's legacy, and are failing in horrific ways. In your playthrough, you will have several opportunities to aid in some discovery, only for it to backfire. All this culminates at the end of Act 2, when the Sovereign of the Deerwood convenes a trial to decide whether the practice of Animancy will continue to be permitted. Naturally, you are allowed to weigh in, and your counsel will be what breaks the stalemate between the progressives and the traditionalists in the city. Here again, we get to, by proxy, take a stand on another of the great questions of our species, only this one's a little less nuanced than some of the others. It felt to me on my first run like there's only one real choice, and that is to support Animancy. Sure, a lot of Animancers are terrible, but it's happening now. There's no way to uncrack this egg, the only way forward is through. Besides, your character knows things about Animancy only a handful of others do, and that is the depth of untapped potential the field has. In the history of Eora, unlike our world, there is a now lost civilization that had, unbeknownst to many, reached a high level of technological advancement. I mean, miles ahead of where Kith are now. In the Deerwood, the civilization is called the Engwithans, and in your various quests, you will delve their ruins for artifacts and information. Through events in the main quest line, you gain a unique insight into the Engwithans, and what you learn, gradually, is that they were masters of Animancy, and you get to see the wonderful and terrible things it is capable of. In the big reveal of the third act, a reveal that floored me on my first playthrough, you discover that even the gods are a product of Engwithan Animancy. You've wondered how mortals could kill a god? It's because we made the gods in the first place. In the ancient times, at the height of their power, the Engwithans were revolted by the savage superstitions of other Kith, and resolved to put an end to them by making more civilized gods to replace them. The pantheon they made are the gods that you know and interact with. Aethys, Mogren, Whale, Scan, Woodica, etc. They are all artifice, the creations of Animancers, a noble lie to rein in barbarity. And out of nowhere, we face the death of God again in the story. First, when we learn that gods can be killed. Second, when we learn there aren't even gods at all. And now, post hoc, we have a genuinely compelling reason to oppose Animancy in the trial. Its practice will inevitably reveal the truth about the gods. If your character believes, as many do in our world and history, that, real or not, we need the gods, or God, that it's a falsehood we depend on, then your character would oppose Animancy. The whole plot of the White March 2, the second expansion, touches on this, and prods us to think about whether the secrets of the Engwithans are better off forgotten. If you choose to travel with Aloth in your party, all of these discoveries get even more interesting. Aloth is a kind of wimpy wizard, and the first companion you will encounter outside of the tutorial. Incidentally, he's also voiced by Matt Mercer. In his quest chain, you help him with a condition that needs Animancy to fix, and through it you see some of the failures of its practitioners. Aloth is always opposed to Animancy, but it isn't till later in the story you discover why. He reveals after Act 2 that he is an agent of the Leaden Key, the secret religious society who, for millennia, keep the truth about the gods a secret and serve as their missionaries to new cultures. They're also your main antagonist in the first game. The final battle is a direct confrontation with Theos, the Grand Master of the Leaden Key. Depending on your dialogue with Aloth during the game, you can nudge him towards faith in humanity or cynicism towards it, the other side of the coin to Adair's arc. If you choose faith, he will realize the error of the Leaden Key and set out to dismantle the organization and reveal the truth to the world. If you choose cynicism, he will continue believing that Kith cannot be trusted with the truth about the gods and takes up Theos' position as Grand Master of the Leaden Key after his death, preserving the organization's mission, only operating now in more humane ways. Now that we know the truth about the gods, we are also finally in a position to understand why Eothas incarnated as Widewind and led his crusade against the Deerwood. His ultimate plan was to reveal the truth about the gods to Kith and to destroy the Wheel. Now, we haven't talked about the Wheel yet. It's what the people of Eora call their cycle of reincarnation. Souls don't die when their bodies die. Instead, they return to the Wheel, turning around and eventually returning back to an embodied form. Sometimes, rarely, the memories of past lives can awaken in a person, a condition that often leads to madness. The Wheel, and issues surrounding it, are really where the questions about eternal reoccurrence present themselves. Obsidian also uses it to represent themes of memory and identity that were so core to its legacy in Planescape Torment. In Pillars 1, the Wheel seems very metaphysical and supernatural. But in Pillars 2, Deadfire, we learn that it's actually much more grounded than we initially thought. The Wheel is an actual machine, a complex system of soul highways that connect across the entire globe. It is partly a natural cycle, kind of like the cycle of precipitation, and part Engwithan technology. The system of reincarnation always existed. That's the natural part. And it is brutal and error-prone. Or rather, it was before the Engwithans constructed the Wheel to hone and perfect it. And the gods, their fake pantheon, are tightly braided into its function. Destroying the Wheel would destroy all the myth and mystery behind the gods and expose them as charlatans. It would rob the gods of their leverage over Kith. This was Eothas' mission. His enemies are, to a certain extent, all the rest of the gods who, naturally, don't like him trying to undermine their power, but is exemplified by the goddess Woodica. Woodica is the tyrant queen, the goddess of oaths, law, rulership, and hierarchy. Of all the gods, she has the least faith in humanity. To her, Kith are pathetic weakling children who will inevitably harm themselves without the gods' rightful despotic rulership. She's the steadfast manifestation of the Engwithan philosophy that Kith without the gods are savage barbarians. Eothas, by contrast, believes it is the gods that are holding Kith back. If they were allowed to know the truth, they would rise to the occasion and earn technological and moral progress. Destroying the Wheel will ensure mankind's freedom against divine tyranny. Or so Eothas thinks. So, in a fascinating reversal, Eothas, the god whose death represented the death of the old religious order, steals another of Jesus' signature moves and resurrects, and this time represents the Nietzschean love of mankind and independence against divine rule. All of this is what launches the plot of the second game, Deadfire. Despite this recasting of the same themes of the death of God and the noble lie, Deadfire's narrative design is, comparatively, much more focused on things mundane and mortal than divine. In this game, colonialism is explored in much more detail. The Deadfire is a region torn between 4 factions, some native, some colonizers, each with their own culture and philosophy toward religion and the gods, but also on the economy, nature, resources, and political structure. Many reviewers have said this creates an undesirable tension in the narrative of the game. There's this epic divine main plot, but it's seemingly disconnected from what you spend most of the game doing, which is deciding which political faction should control the future of the Deadfire. I entirely disagree with this opinion. I think it completely misses the point of the divine main plot, which is all about choosing between faith in Kith or faith in the gods. In Pillars 1, we learn a lot about the gods. In Deadfire, we learn a lot about Kith. Both are important to the final decision and thus synergize with the overarching story of the series. By focusing so much on Kith, Deadfire gives us reasons to either have faith in their potential or be repulsed towards cynicism by their failures. I was also struck by one YouTube reviewer, I'll link his video in the description, who said of the 4 Deadfire factions that the Principi felt out of place. I assume that he feels that they are out of place because they don't fit in as well with the overarching theme of the game. I also disagree with this opinion, because of the 4 factions, I found them, especially the Ferrante branch, to be the most satisfying conclusion to the whole series. Why? Because I think they best embody the Nietzschean philosophy of independence, cruelty, and finding joy in human life. They are the faction that truly face the reality of infinite reincarnation and say, good, I'm up for another. Alternatively, it's also very satisfying to side with Woodica and fight to preserve the old religious order against Aethys and the advances of Animancy. For this kind of run, I find the Juana faction fits best. For the past month or so, as research for this video, I've been replaying the series. In this run, my watcher is the Orlan rogue Huck of the High Seas, the dreaded Phantom of the Fonferros. In my Deadfire import, I chose the Mindstalker multiclass, Soulblade, and Assassin subclasses. It was a blast to play, and I've included the build in an article for my supporters on Patreon. This article is a fairly in-depth analysis of the Soulblade Cypher subclass, and offers a powerful Soulblade build to fit each of the 4 Deadfire factions. Huck is the build for the Principi. Speaking of Patreon, I recently gained 2 new supporters who I'd love to recognize right now. Jeff, Aurelian, if you're listening, thank you so much for your support. And to my longtime supporters, Marchitar, Ghost Coast, Soul Servant, and the guy who started it all, CA Castaway. Gentlemen, thank you. I won't let you down. And thank you all for watching. I'll catch you next time.